opportunities to
Recording in
upscale
progress.
investment, infrastructure, and digital development. Post the forum, which is the next slide, as we had advised the Joint Committee 2 months ago, the decision on extension of AGOA is in the hands of the US Congress. Congressional advisors will now brief senators and representatives on the outcomes of the forum. 2 bills on AGOA extension have already been prepared by individual legislators, and additional legislators are expected to make their position known in the next few months. That following the resolution of the deadlock on election of the Speaker of the House of Representatives, the congressional calendar will now be finalized. And once it's finalized, it will reflect the likely timeframes within which US legislators expect to consider and finalize a decision on AGOA. South Africa and other African countries will engage each other, our respective private sectors, and our US counterparts to consider the outcome of the AGOA forum, to step up efforts to utilize benefits, to make the case for early extension, and to enable the widest participation of countries in AGOA. On the next slide, we deal with the next steps, and there's work being done on a number of different areas. First, we're briefing Cabinet on a regular basis on key developments relating to trade and AGOA as part of Cabinet's overall responsibility and guidance on these matters. We provide key information. Second, we're engaging with South African business and labor stakeholders to prepare for a scale-up in the use of AGOA and to prepare for the implementation of the African Continental Free Trade Area and to strengthen common messaging between stakeholders. Third, we're engaging with provincial and local stakeholders to provide information and identify opportunities in the use of AGOA and the AfCFTA, as well as to see how these two can be used by individual firms in combination. Fourth, there are meetings of African trade ministers to consider further lobbying efforts. It will be held in the first part of next year and in December this year. There's also, fifthly, a South African investment conference that's planned for 2024 that will, among others, highlight trade opportunities for South Africa and other AGOA beneficiaries. The sixth area is research on regional value chain opportunities and identifying additional value chains for AGOA. The seventh area is joint African meetings with US administration counterparts, covering potential refinements to AGOA and possible dates for congressional decision. The eighth area is bilateral meetings with members of Congress. And the final one is that the next AGOA forum will be held in the United States in 2024 on a date that the US administration will announce. And that provides a useful place to get for lobbying, to get that forum to provide final clarity on the timeframes. What we were able to bank in this particular forum that was held in Johannesburg is a wide appetite for the extension of AGOA. And what we now need to do, and I think congressional representatives heard us, and the US administration heard African countries, that the sooner we get to a final decision, the better. In the past, there's been an instance where the decision was taken literally as the legislation was expiring. And we've made the case to the US administration and to Congress that it will be enormously helpful to everyone if there's a much earlier decision to renew and to extend, because that provides a very useful guide. And the number of messages that have come from the US administration and Congress that supports extension is much earlier than normally would be the case. So we remain hopeful that that's a good sign that we can get an early decision on the extension of AGOA. We've provided more information in the next few slides, but these was information that I'm not going to take the committee through because it's information that we have provided to the committee covering trade, the structure of trade, the US-South Africa trade relationship, and the legal framework, as well as the benefits of AGOA. So, Chair, can I then conclude my remarks and thank you for this opportunity and say that I was particularly struck by the enormous unity of purpose within South Africa's delegation at AGOA, that we had business and labor representatives as well as civil society participating in discussions with their counterparts, and they all spoke unified voice. We were also joined by our counterparts from other African countries, and they too were all of a similar view. We were also very pleased that we got the support of American business people, trade unionists, and civil society, as well as expressions of support from the US administration and the US Congress. So thank you very much, Chairperson, for this opportunity. May I then hand back to you.
Thank you very much, Honorable Minister, for the briefing. Just before we take questions, any update, Ms. Solomons, on YouTube?
Yes, Chair, they've joined the platform.
They've joined the platform. Okay. All right. No, that's fine. Can we, honorable members, have questions? You can raise our hands. I'll start with the Honorable Marais.
Chairperson, my raise the hand function is not working at the moment.
Okay, you'll be next after Honorable Marais. Any other hands? Okay, let's start then with followed by Honorable AP van der Westhuizen. Honorable Marais, you can go first.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you very much, Minister, for honouring your commitment and briefing us at the NCOP. Your feedback is very much welcomed. I do have a few questions of clarity. So I think, firstly, I'm quite interested to hear what the discussions and agreements were, particularly with regards to agriculture, noting that it is a very important industry to our province. And I note, of course, that we want to see growth in this. So to understand better or expand on this point, were there any new additions or removals to the proposed legislation were negotiated for the next renewal of AGOA? And also, what steps would be taken in the legislation to kind of broaden and support the agricultural sector? Then this is a question I've asked before, but it's one that I've struggled to get clarity on, is on the number of jobs on the line when it comes to AGOA. From my side, I'm particularly interested in the number of jobs in the Western Cape, because from the department or the Provincial Department of Agriculture, we see that directly linked jobs are at about 140,000. And so if the department could share, or the minister could share more numbers and figures, that would be very helpful. Then I'm quite curious as well about the engagements with the US, and I wanted to understand in this context what specifically the next legislative measures are. So it was mentioned that the legislators will present these bills. If we can find out, please, who those legislators are, and also to request if we can be kept updated on the congressional timelines that are related. And then in terms of concerns, if there were any concerns raised by the US counterparts on South African AGOA and how these were Mauritius, I'm glad to hear that doesn't sound like it's going to be the case anymore.
Honorable Marais, can you just repeat the question that you've just asked, because we were breaking for a minute?
Oh, okay. So the second last question was whether there were any concerns raised by US counterparts on South Africa's inclusion in AGOA and how these were addressed. And then my last question is, with regards to Mauritius being graduated, what is the risk that South Africa might also be graduated at a later stage, or that the US might decide to revoke membership at a later stage? And how will this risk be mitigated? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you so much, Honorable Marie. Honorable Vice Chair.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Also from my side, my appreciation for the extensive presentation by the Minister. Minister, there's been in your presentation an acronym which I take as perhaps might refer to phytosanitary measures. As we know, agricultural exports, are not only determined by things such as the import tariffs on the other side, but we've seen in the case of some countries that they make it extremely difficult for South African farmers to export due to these phytosanitary measures, where, for example, our citrus fruit need to be cooled for an extensive period to very, very low temperatures to safeguard those other countries against diseases such as the false codling moth. Although we've been exporting fruit for decades to those countries, and it seems to me as if the climatic conditions in those countries do not support, such insects, and therefore pose very little risk to those countries. So my question is just, to what extent, when we negotiate in terms of the agreement going forward, and to make it easy for Southern African countries to export to the USA, to what extent would we also be able to influence other barriers that might be put up in can I say, sometimes we get the impression that it's in an effort to curb or to make life more difficult for our exporters from South Africa. Then the second one is just also in terms of perhaps expanding this agreement. What is your take on the appetite of perhaps also including other potential export products that have not been covered in the existing agreement with the USA? Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Honorable Ambassador, you'll forgive me, I said you were going to come in immediately after Honorable Marie. Sorry for that. You can come in now.
Thank you very much. Minister, mine is more comments than questions. Minister, I think we need to congratulate you on a job well done, bringing the whole of Africa together with the US partners and bringing the South African contingent on a national basis together without the negative connotations that some people may want to present sometimes in the foreign arena, and they don't realize how it impacts negatively on South Africa, South African exports, and South African business. Minister, I would suggest that we need to harmonize what we're doing with the Africa Free Trade Agreement, especially with the African ambassadors stationed in Addis, together with the African ambassadors stationed in the US, to in fact harmonize the programs that we in fact want to take forward. And then, Minister, I want to suggest that either yourself or a delegation briefed by yourself meets with all the blocs in Africa, and actually explain to them and get them on board to take this fourth minister as well. Then just in response to the question about the citrus thing, Chairman Khai, myself, and I think Powell and Honorable Moimang were at the South Africa EU Parliament, where we raised the same questions. And I think we got a certain amount of degree of consensus around those issues. But the Europeans, I think, sometimes say something at the parliamentary level and another thing at an executive level. But I think when we come back with that report, Chairperson, I think we should also report on our trip to Europe regarding those matters. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Honorable Ambassador. Honorable Muimam.
Thank you, Chair. Let me also take this opportunity to express my appreciation from the briefing that the Minister has given to us. Indeed, it's correct that the presentation built on the presentation that the Minister gave us previously, and the outcome of the summit indeed confirmed that the leadership that the Minister is providing in relation to AGOA, to the country, it must quite be appreciated, and that the concern raised by other people that were trying to sort of create an impression that AGOA was under threat. There was nothing around that. And I think that that is as a result of the leadership that the Minister has given in relation to AGOA. Now, the critical to me is the process. How far is the process? Because the Minister indicated the post-summit process, and that the extension of AGOA requires a decision of the U.S. Congress. I think it would be important probably just to get a sense in terms of is the country briefed in terms of at what level is this a process around extension? Because it's always important to deal with the uncertainty that goes hand in hand with the failure on the part of the extension to take place, particularly to the regional blocks that are relying on the leadership that South Africa is providing. What would be quite critical also is to get a sense in terms of the legislators, because I think the Minister indicated that the congressional advisors will brief senators and representatives on the outcomes of the forum, and then that will entail the two bills on AGOA. It's always important to get a sense as to whether is there any cause for concern if that process has not started. But more than that, in terms of the benefit to the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, I think it's quite important that there is an opportunity for AGOA to be able to broaden the opportunities provided by this trade agreement. Lastly, Minister, countries that were removed because of their domestic affairs, Niger, Burundi, is there an opportunity, whilst probably the civilian rule in those countries comes into play, that there's a possibility that those countries could be readmitted as part and parcel of AGOA. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Minister.
Thank you so much, Honorable Maima. Let's go back to you, Minister, for the responses. We'll have another round, honorable members, if there are any. Honorable Maima, Honorable Dang, if you can lower your hands, please.
Chairperson, thank you very much. Can I also thank the honourable members for some of the very warm comments that have been made. Of course, with these things, success always requires the effort of many, many different people. And I want to, instead of, though the members of the committee have been very generous in their comments, I want to recognize the enormous amount of work that was done also by our partners from other African countries and from the business community and organized labor. They've been there step by step backing our efforts to get AGOA renewed and to get it renewed as soon as possible. On the specific questions, Chairperson, starting with the questions raised by Honorable Murray, on agriculture, there was a session that dealt specifically with agriculture and looked at what are the opportunities to do more on the agriculture front. And in addition to that, that was really an opportunity where we had representatives from government, the private sector, and others able to reflect on the agricultural opportunities. We also looked, I had floated with representatives from the various players in the US political establishment, what the appetite would be to expand on the number of products. And it's a matter I'll come back to under the questions raised by Honorable van der Westhuizen. So with agriculture, I think it's if I had to codify the issues, it would be things like sanitary and phytosanitary measures, market opportunities, partnerships that can be formed, how to ensure that technical standards are improved on the African continent, and also what we can do to promote food security on the African continent. Using, yes, access to the US market as one of many instruments, but also through more scientific methods of agricultural production and building regional value chains. If you have drought in one part of the continent, we should not have populations in that area being completely at risk when we have value chains that would have opportunities in other parts of the continent to source agricultural products. So having a more coordinated, thoughtful approach to agriculture was one of the things that came out. We did give some thought to the steps taken to broaden agricultural products, and I'll come back to it when I deal with Honorable van der Westhuizen's questions. On the jobs in line, as I have indicated in the previous meeting of this committee, there is no clear, simple methodology to calculate the number of jobs that are affected by a particular trade agreement. Sometimes trade secretariats and the private sector and governments do that to give a very general thing. But let me give an example. Let's say South Africa is a significant exporter of grapes to the United States. And let's say in grapes or in any agricultural products, and I'm going to use a few examples, numbers, just by way of illustration, not to say that they relate to this example of grapes. I don't want the grape farmers to think I'm talking specifically about them, or citrus for that matter. Now, maybe let me use citrus because it came up from Honorable van der Westhuizen. if we have an advantage, let's say a 5% advantage in the US market, because for argument, the tariff is 5%. If all else remains the same, we can calculate what is the likely impact if that tariff preference was removed. Ordinarily, it would mean our product would go in at a price 5% higher. We can then do a sensitivity study in the US market to see, do we have major competitors, either domestic competitors in the US market or other exporters, whose products are within that 1 to 5% price range. If it transpires that their products are significantly more than 5% more expensive than South African products, then the impact may be neutral, meaning the loss of that preference may have no impact. If, on the other hand, it is at 4%, it depends on the price decisions of South African exporters. Do they cut their prices by 1% to retain that market share or not? If it is a 5%, there's someone else, it's 4.5% within price range, then we may face some stiff competition if we lose our preference. Now, I'm giving that as an example to say, if, however, the South African exchange rate weakens by more than 5%, then our price competitive advantage on the US market rises by that percent. So if the rand was to weaken by 7%, then our price competitiveness increases by 7%. Conversely, if the rand was to strengthen by 7%, then our price disadvantage in the US market rises by 7%. Now, I've just taken two factors. I've just taken the preference level and the exchange rate. I've not thrown in what Honorable van der Westhuizen has raised, which is the SPS measures, and I'll come back to that, to say that it is very hard to build a reliable model that will calculate what the impact will be on jobs in a given area. It is clear that South Africa would still be able to sell agricultural products without those preferences, but it is also likely that we won't sell all of the products we currently sell, that it will be a negative impact on South Africa's agricultural exports and car exports and so on. So I have taken note in previous correspondence that and public statements that have been made that different players, for example, agricultural players, banks in South Africa and others, have all done their estimates of what they think the impact of loss of AGOA will be. I've also shared with the committee that AGOA accounted last year for ballpark 2% of South Africa's total exports. To give some context to the fact that it is a measure with retaining and with fighting to retain, but we are not going to get a consensus between two different economists on what the jobs impact would be. I've looked at figures in American reports and they vary greatly year by year. I've looked at data from the South African private sector and they are out of line with each other and with what is in international studies. So coming back to it, we should recognize that every job that we have in South Africa is worth defending and trying to retain. And AGOA does give us an advantage onto the US market. That there is no simple methodology to calculate the number of jobs that will be lost in a particular sector through loss of benefits of AGOA. I've taken note of the comments by various industry players, and I think members of the Western Cape Legislature has also written to my department repeating those numbers. So I've taken note of all of those, but there isn't a methodology that will give us an absolutely accurate sense of the jobs impact. On the legislatures, the two legislators are John Kennedy and Chris Coons. The next steps are, as I've outlined on the penultimate slide today, that the representatives or advisors and counselors to the senators and the House representatives are now and will now be briefing their committees and their members on their insights out of the AGOA forum, and that the further steps will be that more legislators are expected to put forward their own views on the extension and the terms of the extension, and that we will monitor that. When we've got to critical mass, in other words, when we can see that a number of the views are now known, then we could probably have a much better sense of the timeframes. In the meantime, we will do what we need to do, and the Washington ambassadorial corps of sub-Saharan African countries are now engaging US policymakers and influencers to try to make the point around AGOA. Were there concerns raised by the United States on South Africa's inclusion in AGOA in the formal sessions that I attended? No. The previous concerns I have reported to the committee, this committee, the joint committee of the NCOP and the portfolio committee in September this year. On Mauritius's graduation, is it likely? Well, we've made the argument to the US government that we believe it would not be appropriate to graduate Mauritius. We provided the detailed arguments on technical arguments as well as policy arguments and why we felt it would be inappropriate. And South Africa does not have the immediate danger of its per capita income being cited. But again, as I've indicated, exchange rates can determine how your per capita income is calculated. So it is something that we've raised more generally also with the American administration, whether we could rethink the procedure around graduation. At the moment, graduation is a binary, you're in or you're out. There's no midway point. And we've raised with the American government a more nuanced and carefully thought through graduation policy, which they were very interested in our views. On revoking membership, the very nature of a unilateral market access is that the US is able to, at any stage, decide to revoke the participation of any country in the facility that is available, which is AGOA. And as was mentioned, and I'll come back to that later in response to, I think it was Honorable Moimang's question, to illustrate some of those dangers. Moving on to Honorable van der Westhuizen's questions. Honorable van der Westhuizen, you're absolutely right. That acronym stands for Sanitary and Phytosanitary Standards. And it's really the, let's call it animal health or plant health standards that are often used in international trade for two purposes. Legitimately, to ensure that, in fact, populations and livelihoods remain safe from the possibility of disease and similar challenges being extended from one locality to another. But sometimes they're also misused. And you've given a very good example, I want to say, Honorable van der Westhuizen, on South African citrus fruit. So perhaps I can briefly expand on it, because I know that some of the members of the committee would be very familiar with this, but it may be some value to any member that's not followed the detail of it. South Africa has been expanding our citrus production over a number of years. We go to a supermarket during our citrus season and the shelves are bursting with the most delicious citrus fruit you can find anywhere in the world, and it's South African made. And that's not just my view. I have shared citrus fruit with a number of European political representatives, including more than one head of state. And having had them eat our citrus fruit, I've asked them whether this is not some of the most fantastic citrus fruit that they've tasted. And they've generally concurred with me. But because we were growing our citrus fruit, in our view, we were beginning to challenge the dominance of traditional players in the market. Spain is the world's biggest exporter of citrus fruit. South Africa has become the world's second biggest exporter of citrus fruit. And for that reason, in our view, we've had more and more protectionist tendencies in the European Union around citrus fruit, led by a campaign by Spanish farmers. Initially, they identified something called CBS citrus black spot as the ostensible reason for wanting to limit South African, first monitor and then limit South African citrus exports. So parts of South Africa that has citrus black spot is not given access to the European Union market. Then at a later point, they identified what they call false codling moth as another reason to limit South African exports to European markets, and they've started to introduce about a year and a half ago a set of measures that require us to chill our fruit from effectively the time they leave our ports, and that adds an enormous additional cost. If I look at the estimates of what the cost is for both CBS and false codling moth, it's about 4 billion rand of additional costs visited on our farmers, and it's done to limit the competitiveness of South African citrus fruit. And in our view, it's an absolutely clear and naked protectionist measure. It's not informed by science. It's not proportionate in terms of the trade rules. And we are busy taking this matter up with the European Union, and we've lodged some of our concerns on one of these two with the World Trade Organization. Now, how do we influence this? Next year, there will be a World Trade Organization meeting that will take place, and it is our intention to ensure at that meeting that the South African position, which talks to the misuse of sanitary and phytosanitary measures, will feature on the agenda. That it will be an opportunity for us to try to see, can we tighten the trade rules so that there is less scope for people to misuse the existing trade rules. So the place where that can happen, then Honorable van der Westhuizen, is through what we call multilateral negotiations at the World Trade Organization. And as regards AGOA and the expansion of the agreement, I floated at the session with the US congressional advisors what the appetite was to expand the number of products. I gave a few examples. For example, I took beef products as an instance where the bulk of beef products are not covered by AGOA. I took a few value chains, African value chains, and I pointed to parts of those value chains that are not given the preference. And the advice that we got from the US representatives is that, of course, we can raise those, but it will take them some time to do the necessary impact studies to see, are there American domestic producers that are affected by this? And if so, to what extent are they affected? And so the calculation we need to make is that if we ask for a significant number of additional products to be added, or even some additional products to be added, will it so delay a decision in the US administration and by Congress that we stand the danger of AGOA expiring without this matter having been resolved? Will we get now beef farmers in the US mobilizing against the extension of AGOA if they see there's a danger that beef could be added? So that's one set of considerations that we need to take into account. The second set of considerations, and Honorable van der Westhuizen may have seen in the presentation, that I referred to the fact that we floated the idea of a two-stage reform program, that in stage one, we tried to essentially extend the existing benefits, maybe with small tweaks, and that we do that expeditiously, in other words, quickly, that we get certainty as soon as is possible and as early in 2024 as is possible, and that we don't wait until September 2025. And that a second phase would be improvements in AGOA, where we can bring in additional products and other important refinements. So the Americans know that we are cautious, that we want to move rapidly and quickly on extension, but we do have some products that we thought would be worth considering. We haven't made a big public statement on those products because at this stage, it's not in our interest to get a number of lobby groups in the US feeling threatened by the extension of AGOA. We've got to manage this with due care, respectful about the economic interests that there may be in the United States. Those farmers and workers also have interests that they would want to look after. Keen, obviously, to advance South African and African interests, and needing to find an appropriate balance on these. And so that is informing our thinking on it, Honorable van der Westhuizen. On the questions raised by Honorable Dango, first, thank you very much, Honorable Dango, for your comments. And you've made an important point, which is how to harmonize trade arrangements within the African continent. And there's a few aspects to it. The first aspect is obviously lowering our own trade barriers between African countries to foster greater trade through the AFCFTA. And if I look at my travel record in the last couple of years, I have gone to other African countries significantly more regularly than I have gone to any one other part of the world, because so much of our work is exactly as you've indicated, to harmonize more of our economic relations and our trade. God willing, there's also an opportunity for us to make this case in December at a meeting of African trade ministers, and again next year. In those discussions, we meet not only with the different regions, but we very often have these meetings with trade ministers at the bilateral level. Most of our focus has been on rules of origin and the best de-risking strategy in an uncertain world. And the world is uncertain in many, many different ways. But a good de-risking strategy is to build the competitiveness of our own sectors and to increase trade among African countries. And many of the challenges that we face in markets in other parts of the world could be moderated, could be reduced by us trading more with each other. Africa imports an enormous quantity of goods. And that represents an opportunity for African producers to do more. Honorable Dango, thank you for reminding us of the engagement that South African parliamentarians had with their EU counterparts on citrus. Of course, we welcome every effort that is made to help make the argument. But even after that meeting, we again heard some really challenging comments coming from some economic interests in the European Union. Honorable Moimang, thank you for your questions too. The processes on extension, if I can start from our side, South Africa, ours is very simple because this is a unilateral market access. There's nothing more we need to do at the level of legal modalities. If indeed the American Congress approves the extension on the current terms, then we would simply utilize our existing framework. If there were changes made by the United States that affects maybe a technical standard for products or exclusion of products, we will communicate that to the market in South Africa. On the American side, of course, the US Congress sits with a large number of legislative and other priorities that they need to look at. And they will then consider trade agreements with other parts of the world, AGOA, which is not a trade agreement, but unilateral opening, their legislative program on US domestic issues, their budget processes. And those are matters that we can lobby, but fundamentally, those are decisions that are taken there. As if, for example, the South African government was to introduce a bill in Parliament, ultimately it is up to Parliament to decide the dates when it will consider the bill. And we've had bills going through the South African Parliament rapidly, and we've had others taking some while. So each legislature has their own rules on it. But the key is to get the support of both the Republicans and the Democrats so that we make this a bipartisan issue. In the same way that I've tried to make the point in discussions in South Africa, that as South Africans, we need to have a common view on AGOA and be supportive of each other's efforts to promote the extension of AGOA. And in the US, that they up to now have not turned AGOA into a political football where the one party tries to score points against the other party. And that's been very helpful to us because it means that bipartisan support can be counted on. Of the two bills in the US Congress already, one is from a Republican and one is from a Democrat. So they may have different views on the modalities, but both parties so far in their public statements have expressed support for AGOA and for the extension. On the cost or the risks of AGOA not being extended, as with any market access arrangement, the value of the access is important to different sectors in the economy. And so we would be working very hard to try to ensure that we retain access. We also look at the measures we can take to try to address issues like the cost of compliance. Sometimes, and it links your question to that, the observation by Honorable Van der Westhuizen too. Sometimes countries or trading blocks put in place a sanitary and phytosanitary measure, and we can assist our firms, our farmers, to better understand what those are and to see how we de-risk in South Africa on those sanitary and phytosanitary standards. On the two bills before the US Congress, the one bill goes for a very lengthy extension, even longer than the 10 years that African trade ministers have proposed. But we think that these are the opening bids that are made in the US Congress, and they both envisage a period longer than 10 years. I wanted to also comment very briefly on the remark that Honorable Moimang has made about exclusion. And there are 4 countries that were taken out of AGOA and 1 country that was added back in. The countries that were taken out of AGOA now recently, in the last 4 or 5 weeks, were Uganda, the Central African Republic, Gabon, and Niger. And the reasons given by the US administration is human rights violation and failure to make democratic progress. And African ministers have urged the United States to engage with the countries concerned and find ways to address the concerns of both sides with a view to having those countries back in AGOA. They're still in AGOA until the 31st of December, but we'd like them obviously to continue even beyond that. One country, Mauritania, has been added back. So even if you're taken out of AGOA, you can be added back to AGOA as long as you are a sub-Saharan African country, and as long as you've not been graduated out, you've been removed for a specific reason. If you've been graduated out on per capita income, on the existing rules, your per capita income would have to change. But as I said, we've also brought that matter up in discussion to see how we can moderate and refine the existing provision on graduation. I hope that has covered all the questions. With one of Honorable Moimang's questions, I got the gist of it, but there was just a little bit of a challenge with the audio on my side. I hope I caught enough of the gist to have responded fully to that question by Honorable Moimang. Thank you, Chairperson.
Thank you very much, Honorable Minister, for the responses. Honorable members, are there any follow-up questions? Honorable Murray, any other hands? Over to you, Honorable Murray.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, just 2 final questions, or 3 final questions from me. The first is, I do appreciate the Minister's explanation with regards to why the jobs figures can't be shared. And I guess my request then is just if you could share the calculations that he has with regards to essentially what is at stake when it comes to AGOA and our route to market, or this route to market. Then, Chair, if the Minister did mention that there was a proposed graduation policy that had been presented to US counterparts for South Africa, if you please provide us with more details on this, including when, if implemented, it would commence. And then lastly, which industries were represented at the summit? Thank you, Chair.
Yes, so much. Any other questions? This is the last round. Okay. Back to you, Honorable Minister.
Thank you very much, Chairperson, and thank you, Honorable Marie. On the jobs figures, as I've indicated, we have not done the calculation in that form, but what I can make available is information that we have shared previously that indicates the preference level and the products that are involved. But I would do it with a cautionary, which I'm sure honorable members will take, that obviously there are multiple factors that influence whether we land a product in the United States. Under the existing rules, we have guaranteed access to the US markets for all of our products, except products that there is a prohibition which should not be permitted in WTO rules. And we have that access through what is called the most favored nation, the MFN principle. So even aside from the preferential access, it would still be MFN access. But if MFN access is less favorable than AGOA access, so we do believe that there's value in retaining the AGOA access. There are some challenges in certain products. For example, South African steel has a very significant anti-dumping duty. If I can put it this way, it's introduced not in the normal trade rules, which an anti-dumping duty would be an exceptional duty to take account of dumping. There's a provision in American legislation called Section 232, which is a national security provision. And so we apply via permit effectively to get access for South African steel and aluminium to the US market, and those are annual. We've had constructive conversations with the US on those. I call it really an attempt at the anti-dumping duty, although it's technically not that. On the graduation policy, of course, because we're negotiating with trade partners, we are cautious, as in any negotiation, about what we disclose during the course of the negotiations. Because if we were to do it in that way, then we would not be able to ever get any progress in trade negotiations. So there's a convention that apply all over that. Other than the public position of countries, they take a very cautious approach. So on graduation policy, we don't want to put a proposal on the table that the US may not support. So there's informal discussions. We've given them an essential principle around graduation that we think they should consider. There are technical arguments we've raised in respect of Mauritius. There's also policy arguments we've raised. And essentially, when we get the feedback, if the US side indicates that they believe that there's value in them revisiting a graduation clause, then we will formalize it and pass it to our US counterparts. Now, in normal trade negotiations, one party put a proposal on the table and the other one responds, and then we respond in turn, and ultimately the hope is we get agreement. Because AGOA is not a trade agreement, it's a unilateral trade facility. At the end of the day, the US will have a carte blanche on their graduation policy. If I can then elaborate a little bit on the principle behind it, recognizing, as I've indicated, that we're cautious not to press some of these matters in the public domain. But essentially what we've said is, at the moment you have a binary arrangement, you're fully in or you're fully out. And there may be value in considering that if you reach a certain per capita income, or if you're below a certain per capita income, you get the full benefits. As your society develops and you get a higher per capita income, you can then get perhaps a truncated set of benefits, but you don't lose everything. So it's thinking through a gradual step-by-step move from being fully in AGOA to, with time, slowly losing some of the benefits as your level of development arises. Now, we've raised that because the fundamental principle in the US legislation is that this is intended for countries below a certain level of development. That's the cornerstone of AGOA. It doesn't even cover the whole African continent. It only covers sub-Saharan African countries, and it has an approach on income. At the technical level, we've pointed to some of the challenges with per capita income, particularly in societies with high levels of income inequality. that it's not always a proxy for development, for reasons that I think economists readily concede, that if you have high levels of equity in a society, then a per capita income very often approximates a measure of aggregate welfare. Where you don't have that, you've got huge inequalities, then it may simply be an average that does not describe whether a very large number of people, the vast majority of people, have a high or rising standards of living. So the formal graduation policy, we haven't put on the table. We're engaging, we're exploring ideas, and at an appropriate moment, we will then put something on the table if we get a signal that there's definitely an appetite to revisit it. If the signal is that there's no appetite to revisit the graduation policy, then we would not want to put something on the table and have that be cited as a reason to delay consideration of the extension of AGOA. On the third questions, which industries were represented? Well, no industries were represented in the formal sense of the word represented, because AGOA, the forum itself, where the governments spoke to each other, had trade ministers that were the representatives. They were supported by technical experts from their departments and ministries. And where necessary, they had technical expertise from a range of other departments or ministries. From the American side, they were represented by the United States Trade Representative, but she had very senior representatives from a number of different departments, like the U.S. Department of State, the U.S. Department of Agriculture, the U.S. Department of Commerce, and others. What we did have is a number of industries whose products were exhibited at the industrial exhibition and at the food fair that we hosted. We also had a number of industries at the private sector forum and at the labor forum from trade union or worker representatives. And of course, in all of that, I had requested that we also give an opportunity to have the voices of businesses reflected when we had these policy discussions in the format of breakaway sessions. So we had a number of breakaway sessions. For example, there was one on the health sector, there was one on food, and so on. If I look at whether there was participation in one or more of the different activities that together make up the AGOA forum, then I would say most sectors of the South African economy found an opportunity to play a part. Agriculture was definitely there. We had agricultural products on display, including food products, quite a bit of food products. We had representatives from the agricultural sector that we invited to be on panels that had discussions and shared ideas. Food security was one, as I indicated. We had, for example, the mining industry participating in some of the discussions, different parts of manufacturing, the service sectors, like your telecommunications sectors. And at the forum of the private sector, BUSA, that's Business Unity South Africa, the BBC, that's the Black Business Council, and BLSA, that's Business Leadership South Africa, all participated in the private sector forum, and they together represents the entirety of organized business in South Africa, and they would have drawn their members from just about every sector of the South African economy, and all your big industry associations in agriculture, in mining, in steel, and so on, would be members of one of these federations of businesses. So that would be the industrial sectors that we, within the space that I had as host, I tried to provide as many moments of, as many opportunities for the voices of industries to be shared with trade ministers, so that we get the benefit of their views when we considered the matters that was on the agenda of AGOA. I hope that addresses the questions that Honourable Murray has raised, and I again would like to thank you, Chairperson, and hand back to you.
Thank you very much, Honourable Minister, for the responses. I hope members are satisfied with the responses. We will be, all of us, monitoring the developments, particularly in the US Congress. We will then, from time to time, invite the Minister to brief us on the developments in the US with regard to AGOA. But also, the Minister, if he thinks that there's an opportunity for us, for him to brief the committee, we'll be flexible with our program. We'll review our program to accommodate him to brief us and the provinces. But I think we need to take it further, that we're not only focusing on AGOA, perhaps all these other international platforms where South Africa will participate in, the SA-EU discussions. Perhaps we need to invite the Minister and the department, as well as the provinces. Provinces are beneficiaries of these agreements, whether it's I think it was last year, as a committee, we invited the department, DDG Xavier came to brief us on the outcome of the MC12. Perhaps we'll do the same next year, after February, invite the Minister to brief us on the MC13. And we will also invite the provinces, because in the past we just invite the department select committee. But this time around, I think it's good that we should also invite the provinces to be part of those platforms. Whether it's the BRICS, Minister brief us on the BRICS, particularly on issues that relate to trade. Even there, we have to invite the provinces, whether it's the, I don't know if the Minister, I know President participate in the G20. Sometimes will bring the delegation of ministers to be part of the G20. So the Minister could brief us as a committee together with the provinces on the discussions at the level of the G20. So I think perhaps it was a mistake on our part to just, as a province, to just say, as a committee, to invite the department just on our own. So we want to extend this platform to also include the provinces, whether it's AGOA, it's a SA-EU, it's a MC, whether it's MC 12, 13, 14, to invite the provinces where to be part of these particular forums. Thank you very much, Minister. Let me give you the closing remarks before we adjourn the meeting.
Well, thank you very much, Chairperson, for the opportunity to address the committee and the representatives from provinces. And we have a lot of work to do still, and we will be rolling out more information. We'll also use virtual platforms to try to reach more businesses, but also focus on trying to get more work done for opportunities for smaller businesses, women-owned businesses, and bringing more young people into exports. Those are very important ways in which we can strengthen our export efforts, because these help to create jobs in South Africa. It expands the GDP. And of course, by having profitable and well-functioning businesses, they increase investment in the economy, and we can collect tax that can help to pay for the healthcare, housing, education, and other needs of South Africa's people. Thank you very much also to members of the committee as well as members of the provincial legislatures for the time you've given, for the questions and comments that you've made. Thank you very much, Chairperson.
Thank you very much again, Honourable Minister, and also thanks to the honourable members, the select committee from the provinces. We like also to apologize to the legislatures, the provincial legislature, that this was a short notice, but we'll make sure that next time we give enough time for you to prepare. Thanks to all the provinces. I would also like to thank my own province, the Eastern Cape, also the chairperson of the Portfolio Committee on Economic Development. Eastern Cape is one of the beneficiaries of the AGOA in terms of the auto sector in particular. Thank you, Honourable Ndamase, for attending, and also to other members of the provincial legislatures. Thanks to the DG, I saw the DG of the department join us later, and thanks to her and the DDGs, as well as other officials of the department, the officials of the committee, officials of the parliament as a whole. Thank you very much. At this stage, I would like to indicate that until we see each other again, Minister, I'm sure we'll be seeing again each other next week, possible, on the companies amendment bill, if things go well in the NA. Thank you very much. See you on Tuesday morning. Thank you so much. Meeting is adjourned, honourable members, and good afternoon.
Vote of thanks to our Chairperson.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Chair.
Recording stopped.